What's up guys, this is Voxside and welcome to a new After Effects tutorial. I will be using my utility box script for this tutorial, so make sure you follow the link in the description of this video, which will bring you to the utility box page, and you can find all the information on how to install the script on that page. And after you install it, you can go ahead and run it by going to your window. And here you can see I have my utility box version 1.6, and you can go ahead and run this. And you can see I docked it over here to the right. So if I undock this panel, this is how it should look when you open it. And you can go ahead and just dock it wherever you want. And now we can get started. So we will start by creating only one hexagon, and then we will see how we can duplicate this to create this grid. So let's get started and let's create a new composition. And I will name this composition just Hexagon Texture. And I will make this 100 by 100. And for duration, I'm going to use 600 frames because I want the duration to be long enough so we can offset the layers in time. And we will cover that in a second. So hit OK and create a new composition. And let's switch this ellipse tool to be a polygon tool. If I double click this, this will add a new shape layer. Go inside your polystar settings, and for polystar path, you can set the points to 6. Let's set the stroke to 1 so we can see what we are creating. And I'm just going to go ahead and grab this layer, press R for rotation, and rotate this guy 90 degrees. And maybe go inside my polystar options. So I pressed U twice to show these options. And for outer radius, maybe I will drop this value down to maybe 48. So I don't want the edges to be outside of the bounds of the composition. So maybe actually 49 should be fine. And now I want to make the composition fit this exact shape. And what I mean by this is if I go inside my composition settings, I will decrease the height for this composition right until it matches with the upper and lower edges of this hexagon. So I'm just going to lower this height. And you can see how this changes here. And I know I need a value of 85 pixels. And if I go in my project, I can then use this hexagon texture. And I'll drag this inside a new comp. And for this new comp, I will rename this to Hexagon Grid. And let's make this comp 2000 by 2000. And I'm gonna drag this layer up here in the corner, and I'm gonna hold Ctrl and Shift while repositioning, and this will just snap it right in the center here, right in the corner, sorry. And what I want to do here basically is just duplicate these layers and just start creating our hexagon grid. And I'm gonna make this initial duplicate and place it into position, and I can also use the arrow keys for more precise positioning. And I'll grab my original hexagon texture layer and duplicate this guy. And I'll just drag this over while holding Shift so I can drag it perfectly horizontally right until our edges align. And if I press P for this layer and P for my initial layer, you can see now that the X value, so the first value of this position, which is 50 for my first layer, you can see it's 198 for the second layer. So I'm interested here in the difference between these position values. All right, and let's just set this up for 200 so it's more organized, and I can then just simply drag this our third hexagon layer into position. And I will actually just delete this hexagon because I won't be needing this anymore. So now you can see that there's a difference of 150 between the X position for both of these layers. So what I can do with this information now is I can create a grid based off of the difference in this position. So I'm just going to show you what I mean. I'll just delete this layer, and I'm going to go ahead and go to my utility box and go to my clones tab. So click this, and let's see, for the horizontal amount, I want to use a distance of 150. And to fill this entire row, I will need to divide the width of this composition, so 2000, and divide the value by 150. So I can just go ahead and grab my calculator and just type 2000 divided by 150, and this will give me roughly 13 clones. And let's go ahead and choose 14 clones just to be sure that we have enough. We can always go back and delete these. And now for my vertical rows, so for my columns, I know I want a distance of 85 between them because this composition has a height of 85. And for my amount, I will also go to my calculator. So I'm gonna type here 2000, which is the height of this entire composition, and I'm just gonna divide this value by 85, which is the height of this hexagon texture composition, and this will give me a value of 23, and I'll just use 24 just to be sure. So let's type here 24, select our layer and hit create. So now this is the result. All right, and I'm gonna go ahead and select one layer and Control A to select all of these layers. And now I will just drag this back into position. So Control and Shift while moving this to snap to center. And now I can simply Control D and duplicate all of these layers. And now I will just grab any of this layer, and while having all of these duplicates selected, I can go ahead and just reposition this until we create our perfect grid. And something like this should be fine. Let's check out at the bottom. Alright, and this seems to be looking fine. And I can see we have some extra layers over here that we don't want, so we can just go ahead and I'll just grab these and delete, and also grab these at the bottom and delete. Alright, so now this will be our hexagon grid. And you can see we have 635 layers. So this will slow things down a bit in After Effects, but after we set up everything for our hexagon grid, we can go ahead and make a pre-render for that and just use that as a layer. Alright, let's go back in our hexagon texture and let's create a nice texture for this guy. So I'm gonna go ahead and duplicate this layer, and for this duplicate I will go into my settings, so hit U twice for that, and for my stroke I don't need any stroke, and I'm gonna be using the fill color as black, and just go to my rotation for this guy and let's rotate this maybe 45 degrees. And you can see I'm using now this layer to cut out parts of my stroke below it. And I actually think I need to set this rotation to be 60, just so the cutout is made evenly across this stroke. And I can even rescale this a bit. And let's go in my shape layer, and if I turn on transparency, you can see that these black shapes are overlaying, and I'll go to my initial layer and get rid of my fill here. So I'm just using a stroke for this, and for this guy I will set this to be Luma inverted matte for the layer above it, and let's toggle off transparency, or actually I need to set this to be alpha inverted. Alright, and I will grab this initial base layer, duplicate this guy, and for this guy I'm gonna go to opacity, so that's T, and let's set the opacity to maybe 35%. Right, so it's creating this nice border texture. I will grab all of these layers now and Control D. Let's place them on top of our layers, and these three layers I will press S for scale and just rescale this. So maybe roughly, let's say 50%. Alright, and I'm gonna duplicate this layer now, and let's set the opacity to maybe 100% for now. And I also want to go to scale and set this back to 100. Let's go to our properties here, and for my contents I will get rid of my stroke. Let's add a fill to this, and I will set the fill to add. Alright, and now I want to cut out this middle portion from this solid. So what I can do is I can just duplicate this layer, and let's set these layers to be no track matte, so I don't need these to use any matte. And back to my duplicate layer, I will press S and rescale this back to 50. And now if I set this layer below it to be Luma inverted matte, you can see it's cutting out this middle portion from it. And now I can create an animation for this layer, so I will press S for scale. Let's set a keyframe for 50% in the beginning of our composition. Let's go maybe to frame 50 and set it back to 100. And also I will press Shift T, and this will also drag my opacity settings down. So make a keyframe for maybe 50% at frame 0, and then another keyframe for 0% at frame 50 or 49 in this case, right? So it's creating this nice pulsating animation. And I will add an expression to these properties so that the keyframes are repeated, and the expression will be, so you can add an expression by holding Alt and clicking this stopwatch over here. So this expression will be loop out, and that's out with a capital O, so that's very important. Let's open and close parentheses, and in between the parentheses I will type quote, cycle, and quote. And then this will just repeat our keyframe animation, as you can see. And I will go ahead and copy this expression and also add it to our opacity property. And now you can see we've just created this nice pulsating animation. And let's preview this to see if the speed is alright. Alright, so that's a little slow, and let's speed this animation up a bit, and I will also press F9 to create a smooth animation here. Alright, so this is a little better. Maybe even increase the animation time a bit, so spread these keyframes out. And now this is fine. Let's go back in our Hexagon Grid, and you can see everything is updating here. And now I want to offset all of these layers randomly and just create a random variation between all of these individual hexagons. So I can grab all of these layers, so Control A to select all. And in my utility box, I will go to my Layers tab. And for my min and max settings, I will use maybe -25 and 25. And now if I click Randomize, you can see now that this offset all of our layers randomly using a value between -25 and 25, and as a result it's creating this nice variation between all of our layers. And I will go ahead and reselect all of these, and if I move to frame 0, you can see that some layers are offset too much, and I can just drag these over until every layer is already on the screen at frame 0, right? And now this should be fine. And we can also add even more variation if I select all of my layers. And I can go in my Transform tab. And here in my Transform tab, I will turn on opacity. So I want to affect the opacity. And I don't need X, Y, or Z settings for this. And for my amount, I will just use a value of -50. So this will subtract a random value from 0 and -50 from each of these layers. And if I click Randomize, so you can see now that these layers have different opacities, and this just creates a lot more variation and more interesting overall effect. So I'm gonna go ahead and actually just make a pre-render of maybe 300 frames for this layer, which I can use in my final composition. So just readjust the work area and hit Control M. And for my settings, I'm going to use lossless because this works pretty fast in After Effects. Rename this and save your file, and then if you click render, you can render this out and move to the next step. Go ahead and import the render that we've just created, and I will drag this into a new composition for now. So now you can see that this loads much faster. And now I'm going to go ahead and create a new white solid, so that's Control Y. I'm going to switch this tool over to my ellipse tool, double click to add a circle mask, and I'm going to use this mask to create our transition animation. So let's maybe go to frame 0, and let's set a keyframe for our mask from somewhere around this point. And I'm scaling this uniformly by holding Control and Shift. And I'm just scaling this down as small as possible. So I'm gonna add a keyframe for my mask path, and let's move over maybe to frame 150. I'll grab this mask and just rescale it, and I'm gonna scale this up until it's roughly covering this the composition width and height. And let's give it some feather. So maybe a value of maybe 65 should be fine. Let's try 70. Alright, and I'm gonna go ahead and pre-compose this layer, so Ctrl-Shift-C, and I'll name this Transition Layer, or actually just Transition Solid. Alright, and what I want to do now is give this Transition Solid sort of like a texture to these, to the feather over here, and I'm gonna show you what I mean by this. Let's go back inside my Hexagon Grid, and let's actually go back inside our Hexagon texture, and I will hide all of these layers, and I will grab my initial layer that, so the first layer that we created here, and apply this guy, drag it all over to the top, and let's unhide this. And for this guy, I want to go ahead and get rid of the stroke and add a fill to this. And let's set the fill to be white. So now if I go back in my Hexagon Grid, you can see that this will be the result. And what I can do with this guy is, if I save this as an image, so that's Control Alt and S, and let's give this a name, so Hexagon Grid. And for my settings, I'm gonna use just regular JPEG and just RGB for this, and hit OK and click render. And I will import this image now, and let's place this image now into a new composition. And I'm just gonna rescale this guy a bit, just to get rid of these black borders here at the top. And I'm gonna go ahead and pre-compose this layer, and this will be my hex grid, let's say pick. And now I can duplicate this layer. So that's Control D, and let's rescale this to maybe 50%. And I'm gonna go ahead and add a stylize motion tile effect, and set on turn on mirror edges. And for width and height output, I'm gonna use 300 and 300. And if I set this layer now to multiply, you can see that this just adds a little bit more extra detail to our original grid. And now I can use this hex grid. Let's rename this composition to Hex Displacement. And going back in my main composition with the transition solid, I can go ahead and drop my hex displacement layer inside the comp. And let's hide this guy. And for my transition solid layer, I can go and add a Distort Displacement Map. And for displacement layer, I can just use the hex displacement. And let's turn on our vertical displacement, and let's set the vertical displacement to 0. And if I solo this, you can kind of see now the effect that we are getting. So let's use a value of 50 maybe, and this just helps add a bit of texture to our transition layer. I will also go ahead and add a Distort Turbulent Displace, and I will set the Turbulent Displace to be above our displacement map. And let's set the size for this guy to maybe 25, and maybe increase the amount a bit. And you can see this just adds an extra step of detail. And now if I set this transition solid to be stencil luma, so now you can see that now this layer is being used as sort of a mask for everything below it, in this case the Hexagon Grid pre-render. Alright, and let's also rename this composition maybe to Hexagon Full Grid. Hit OK, and let's go ahead and create our render comp, and let's just name this main comp. Let's make this full HD, and 300 frames duration should be good. And in this comp, I'm gonna go ahead and drop my Hexagon Full Grid. Alright, and I'm gonna go ahead and add a background, so Control Y for new solid. Let's rename this to background. And for this background, I'm gonna use a ramp, so go to Generate Ramp. Let's switch this to a radial ramp, and let's move these points around a bit. And for my dark color, I'm gonna use a nice blue. And for my end color, I'm gonna use a dark, let's say 100% black. Maybe desaturate this a bit and just adjust this color a bit. And you can see we have these dark spots, and you can easily change this by going to your layer and set it to screen. And now if I press F4 and turn this into a 3D layer, I can go ahead and add my camera. So I'm using 75 degrees angle view, hit OK. And let's grab my camera orbit tool, so that's C, and then just let's just give it an angle. And this is our effect so far. And I also want to go inside this Hexagon Grid layer, and I'm going to create a new solid and add a circle mask to this, and just rescale this mask a bit. And let's go to feather for this guy and just feather this out. And I'm going to set this guy to be silhouette luma, right? And if I go to my opacity, so that's T, and set this to 50%, and maybe just increase this guy, so increase the scale a bit. Now I'm just sort of creating a nice shadow towards the center, so not everything is the same intensity. And this just adds just a tiny bit of extra detail. So let's step back inside our main comp. And now we can take care of our highlights. Let's go into our project and let's drop this render into a new composition. And I will rename this to Hexagon, let's say highlight. Alright, and let's go back in our original full grid composition. And I want to use this transition layer also in this new composition. So I'm going to set this guy back to normal. And I'm going to grab both of these layers and pre-compose them together. So Ctrl-Shift-C. And let's rename this to transition displaced. Alright, hit OK. And let's set this back to stencil luma. And now I can copy this layer, so Ctrl-C, and then paste it in this composition. So I'm just recreating the original effect. Only, let's press F4, and I'll set this to normal for now. And I'm gonna pre-compose this transition displaced layer again, so Ctrl-Shift-C, and let's name this to transition highlight. Alright, let's step inside this layer now. And I will go ahead and grab this layer and duplicate this guy. And now if I set the first layer to be Luma inverted matte, you can kind of see now we're filtering out these edges, which we can later use in our original comp. And I can also offset this layer in our timeline, and you can see as I drag it to the right, we are filtering out a higher area around our edges. And now back in my hexagon highlight composition, I can set this hexagon grid layer to be Luma matte for my transition highlight layer. Alright, and this is just filtering out the edges around our transition. And now back in my main comp, I can drop my hexagon highlight comp, and let's also make this a 3D layer. And you can see this overlays perfectly with our original hexagon full grid. Let's set this layer to add. And I can go ahead and go to this layer and add a, let's start with a tritone. Let's set the midtones to maybe a blue. Let's give this some glow. Let's increase the glow and maybe decrease the threshold a bit. Let's also go to my curves. And let's also increase the curves. And let's actually place the curves to be the first effect. Or actually maybe place the curves to be below our tritone. Alright, so I'm just increasing the contrast for this guy, for this layer. And let's go ahead and add a blur and sharpen CC radial blur. And let's set the type to fading zoom. And if I increase the amount, and let's reposition its center so it matches with our camera angle, this will be our result. Alright, and I can go back to my curves and redo some adjustments. But this should be alright for now. And for my first layer, I'm also going to go ahead and drop a tritone on this. And let's choose a nice blue for this as well. And hit OK on that. Let's also drop our curves and just increase the contrast maybe. Alright, and I will duplicate this layer. And let's solo this layer for a bit. And I want to sort of increase the contrast for this guy. And you can see I'm sort of filtering out just these edges for the borders. And if I add an effect glow to this, and let's go ahead and duplicate this glow, and let's increase the radius for our second glow, and maybe increase our threshold. And if I unsolo this now, let's set this to add. This will be used now as a layer, sort of like a highlight layer for some of these borders, and just create some more variation. Alright, and this is pretty much the effect. Let's take a look at frame over here. And you can see now that the radial blur is going out of bounds for this layer. So what I can do for this is, if I go inside my hexagon highlight layer, I can go to my composition settings, and I just need to increase the width and height for this. So I will use a value of 3000 for both width and height. And now back in my main comp, you can see now that there's no longer any clipping for our radial blur. And I will also fade this layer out towards where the reveal is ending. And I'm just going to make a keyframe for opacity, and maybe around 107 frames. And maybe at around 150, I'll set this to 0, just so it's completely gone. And we're only left with the original grid layer. So this is pretty much it for this tutorial. You can check out the original project files by following the link in the description of this video, in case I forgot anything. Hopefully you were able to follow along, and I know this can get a little messy with all the pre-composing and all of these layers combined. So if you're new to After Effects, you might have to watch this a few times to really get the gist of it. But if you get stuck anywhere, you can go ahead and ask me anything in the comment section, and I'll do my best to reply and help you out. But thanks for watching so far. If you learned anything new, make sure to drop a like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more tutorials. And I'm out.